Hi, my name is Adam Vaughan. I had the distinct pleasure of serving as the Parliamentary Secretary for Housing, and that meant I worked directly with the Minister in charge of CMHC in the last session of Parliament. I also provided advice directly to the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister, as well as caucus and Cabinet around the issue of home ownership and the pressures that the rental market faces in Canada. The questions that are being asked by the Canadian Home Builders Association are directly responded to, not just with the policies we put in place in government, but also by some of the new initiatives we're proposing in terms of the platform. In particular, on the question of what we're going to do to unlock home ownership in Canada, in particular for first-time buyers, well, we already put together the shared mortgage equity agreements in the last term of Parliament, but we've actually started to model them into different housing markets because different housing markets have characteristics that require special attention. So for Vancouver, Victoria, and for the Greater Toronto area, we've increased the cap on both household income as well as the price of the property you're allowed to purchase. So now in those metropolitan areas that have really intense speculation and really intense home prices, you can now qualify for a shared mortgage equity agreement on houses and properties and condos that are valued at $789,000 or less, and the household income to qualify for the program is now $150,000 per household. Those two changes are important for a couple of reasons. One, they reflect the market conditions in those two areas, but it also signals that our government and our party are now prepared to start looking at the Canadian housing market, not as one big national market, but we're starting to take a look at policies for specific regions of the country in a very similar way to EI is done differently in different regions of the country based on employment and labor numbers. We're going to start looking at housing markets and the way in which the housing market presents itself differently in comparison. We're also allowing more of your retirement savings, the RRSPs, to be used for the down payment. We're giving Canadians a choice as to how they invest to protect their savings, but also how they invest to protect their retirement. And we're seeing real estate being used more and more as a good savings tool by Canadians, something which actually does protect their retirement or later years. And so we're allowing younger Canadians to use more of their RSPs to purchase their first home. We've also put in place a speculation tax now right across the country to take foreign speculation out of the market to a degree. We had some success in the Vancouver area with this. We're now applying it right across the country. And this, we hope, will start to take some of the air out of the real estate market so that we don't produce a bubble and we course correct some of the impacts of rampant speculation without keeping Canadians away from the housing market, because we believe that Canadian homes should be owned as much as possible by Canadians. When it comes to energy efficiency, we have a number of different programs as we move to net zero by 2050 as a country, as a government, and as a people. In particular around housing. We know that cities constitute about 72% of the emissions. We know that built form environments are somewhere around 69%, but when it comes to actual buildings themselves and housing, it's between 11 and 17%, depending on how you calculate the emissions that houses and homes create as a greenhouse gas contribution to the impact on climate change. What this means is that we have to fix the existing stock of housing, and we have to also produce new housing, which is much more energy efficient than it ever has been in the history of this country. On this front today, we announced an innovative new program that stands in stark contrast to the Conservatives. It's an interest-free loan of up to $40,000 per building to retrofit buildings to make them more energy efficient. In other words, we give you the money, you pay back the government without interest when you make savings that flow from doing things like triple glazed windows or replacing the heating and cooling system and coming up with a more efficient way of doing it, adding solar panels or perhaps a new membrane to the roof to make it more insulated. And what we see is that for every dollar we give you, you're going to be saving $5, which means within 5 years, you're making money while saving the planet from climate change. Additionally, the new National Housing Strategy, all new purpose-built rental housing has to be 25% above existing energy efficiency guidelines, and we help fund those programs to get you there with below-interest loans that finance the projects in a way that make them more affordable to build, and that's critically important. The new programs are also supported by a series of other initiatives that we put in place, and they include taking a look at the way in which transit and housing are put together. This is critically important because the way in which we move between home and office, or home and school, or home and wherever we go to enjoy ourselves in a community, that transportation is also part of the greenhouse gas emissions. And when we build transit and housing together in a community setting, we start to not only reduce the cost of housing by reducing the cost of transportation to get to and from the house, we also are starting to invest into the systems to make them more energy efficient. So we reduce costs by coordinating our transit investments, our housing investments, and electrifying fleets, and making sure the housing and the buildings are more energy efficient. One of the reasons this is so critically important in a riding like the one I represent in Toronto is that we've had a huge building surge in the last few years. And in particular, we've seen a lot of new condominiums built in the late 80s, early 90s that weren't built to the best environmental standards. Many of the building systems are about to retire or expire in those places. A lot of windows are going to have to be replaced over the next 10 to 20 years. These loans will help condominium boards as well retrofit their buildings and gain energy efficiency, reducing costs for homes, and also continuing to make sure that high-rise living is an affordable and a viable way for Canadians to house themselves. So yes, we are leaning into the energy efficiency models. We are providing interest-free loans of up to $40,000 per building. We're taking a look at the intersectionality around transit and home ownership, and we're also making sure that rentals and home ownership, landlords and private homeowners have access to these funds to retrofit this country, to build a future that's green, but to help home builders continue to provide homes for Canadians.